Okay, I believe we're live. I was just saying to our two guests here, I'm just going to check that we're all working on LinkedIn because last week or a couple of weeks ago, we did a live stream and it didn't seem to work properly on LinkedIn. It worked on YouTube, but not LinkedIn. So if you can just bear with me very briefly, we'll make sure this is all up and running. And then we'll get going. We'll do some intros and we'll get started. There we go. It is definitely working. Oh, thanks for bearing with me. It is definitely working. I don't know how to repost to my personal. Here we go. Let me do it. Let me do it. This is slick, isn't it? If only AI was doing this. Okay, right. I think I've done everything I can possibly do. Let's go for it. Right then. Afternoon, both. Lovely to have you on the live stream today. Working Well TV. Amazing to have you here. So we've got Egle from Nodes. We've got Julian from Sea Salt Learning. So first off the bat, do you want to introduce yourselves to our watching public? What do you do? Egle, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Egle Vinauskaite. I'm an AI adoption and capability strategist at Nodes. Nodes, I like to think of it as an innovation studio that powers the people side of AI transformation. And we do that through holistic AI adoption programs, through strategic upskilling on human skills, and through AI strategy for L&D and talent teams. And another part of my work is the research that I do. I specifically look into how AI is being used in L&D to help people learn and grow in this increasingly fast-paced workplace. So
sounds interesting. I've already got lots of questions that I want to ask you, but yeah, Julian, you go.
Excellent. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you both. My name's Julian Stodd. I'm a writer and researcher alongside Egle, and I really like how your research is practical and applied, and I try to do that, but probably less successfully. My work explores the context of the social age. It looks at how the ecosystem that our organizations inhabit is changing, and it looks at how emergent technologies impact on that, and then what we do about it in terms of leadership, learning, culture, and change. And in terms of AI, I'm primarily interested not in the tactical adoption today. I'm interested in kind of social strategic foresight. How will we reconsider what we need of our leaders, of our systems and our structures? How will we find a relationship with technology which enables us to adapt, to transform, to change? So I'm kind of looking at that slightly more strategic perspective on this.
Okay, yeah, that was a good elevator pitch. That sounds more impressive than the work I do, certainly. So, look, I wanted to grab you here today. Well, where did we meet? We met at the HR Influential Awards, right? There's a little clang for us. All three of us made that list, HR Influential. I was trying to remember. I can't remember where I came on the list. I can't remember my number. Do you remember yours?
I'm not going to say that out loud.
I just want to know if you definitely both beat me. I was like 26 or something. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure that Egle came way above me, and you and me, Matt, I think we're just hanging around.
There's no need to compare. Our worth is not tied to our place on the list.
Absolutely.
All I remember is the good conversations. So there we were on Tower Bridge, having some great conversations and meeting some wonderful new people. So yes.
Yeah, it was good fun. Although I did realise the other day that my certificate. I hope no one from HR Magazine's watching this. My certificate's still in its tube. I need to get it out and frame it behind myself or something like that. But no. So I bumped into you, and yeah, obviously we got into talking about AI. It's a trendy topic at the moment, right? I think it's trendy because no one particularly knows what to do with it. I speak to lots of people within organizations. I tend to get, I don't know about you two, but I tend to get one or two responses. Either I absolutely love it and I'm using it every single day and it's going to revolutionize everything that I do. Or I had a conversation like this morning. I'm terrified of it. I don't know what it is. and I'm ignoring it as long as I possibly can. There seems to be no middle ground. I don't know whether you've experienced that.
Yes, I think it very much depends on where the person is in their own use of AI, because the more you use AI, the more you understand both its limitations, but also its potential, and the fact that right now it is the worst it's ever going to be. And Ethan Mollick, who is well worth following in the space, he talks about AI in the workplace. He said this thing that really resonated with me, which was about how you haven't really understood AI generative AI unless you've had at least 3 existential crises. So I think, and there was, if I remember correctly, some interesting research from Microsoft that showed that the more people use AI, the more optimistic they are, but also the more they understand the potential downside. So yes, your observation holds.
Yeah. How about you, Julian?
I think maybe I'd sort of say I see it in 3 spaces, the conversation in 3 spaces. So there's the individual, there's a constrained or restricted space, and then there's an unconstrained space. So at the level of individuals, I think people are just getting on with it. I think people are finding out all sorts of really fascinating and interesting things. I'll give you an example of that. I was speaking to a single mother who runs her own business, pulls in under £1,000 a month, and in under an hour she was able to explore how to optimize her tax return, essentially giving herself a 20% uplift in income. And that's really big. That's probably the most useful thing that any technology has done for her in a long time. You know, it's small, it's immediate, but it's impactful. It translates, it synthesizes. So individuals, I think, are doing all sorts of interesting things. There's a restricted or constrained space, which is what organizations are doing. That's often focused on tactical implementation today, efficiency and optimization within the existing system. So the foundation of that is the persistence of the system itself and the structures of power and ownership and control that sit within it. That's also the space of regulation to perpetuate what we have today. Then there's the unconstrained area, and this is the chaotic space. So partly it's the space of defense and cyber warfare and disruption, of scamming. It's also the space of asymmetric disruption and innovation and startups. It's people either through ignorance or lack of constraint or boldness or foresight are doing all sorts of crazy and weird things unconstrained by what sits around us today. And the interesting thing is that each of those 3 things operates within a different rule set. There is no absolute truth of what is good or bad or right or wrong. And those 3 things operate in different spaces. And so the interesting thing within that is that I think the individual space is accelerating and proliferating. I think the unconstrained space is just crazy. It's the Wild West. It's both wonderful and terrible. The middle space is the most boring space of all. It's kind of what organizations are doing today, what they're being sold, what they're buying. But what they're failing to recognize is often the nature of constraint that surrounds them and how much of it they have invented themselves.
So tell me about those constraints. You know, it came up in the intros. I can't remember which one of you said it, around the impact that it'll have on managers and how it plays that role. So is that an example of one of those types of constraints, you know, the hierarchical piece that exists within organizations? And how, well, I guess the broader question would be, how have you seen AI, or how do you think AI will affect the role of leadership or management within organizations? Do you think that'll change?
Okay.
I think that's a follow-up on your answer.
So in the I'm running a series of strategic AI workshops at the moment. So these are with sort of large, complex global organizations with this 3 to 5 year view. What do they need to be experimenting with now? What do they need to be thinking about now? What capability do they need to be developing to transform to be ready for the next stage? And in that work, I've been using a lens which looks at their relationship with higher order thinking and sophisticated artifacts, which is really a way of saying everything that people do in your organizations. So that higher order thinking piece, you know, compare, contrast, spotting trends and patterns, ideas, creativity, innovation, higher order thinking is radically disrupted by AI. Sophisticated artifacts are the things that we create, Word documents, reports, strategic plans, things which we have historically believed are unique, are clever, are a product of our own brilliance. Because we all, rightly believe we are brilliant. We think that we have independent thought. We think that we are creative. We think that we are innovative. We're seeing both those areas very significantly disrupted. So it would be naive to imagine that leaders are going to continue to do what they do today, because we can simply subvert that. We are subverting that immediately. Anybody that's doing their performance review this week is filling it out using AI. One of the telecoms companies I spoke to said the quality of our complaint letters has skyrocketed. That we get really fantastic complaint letters now, but that's no problem because our complaints handling team has also skyrocketed what it does. It's fantastic. So that's already disrupted. So the questions we need to consider are, what do we hold on to because we are dogmatic, either individually or because our systems are dogmatic? Where are our sandboxes? Where can we play? What is our ability to handle ambiguity? Because we know that certainty is going to elude us, or it should elude us. And what opportunity does that give us? And crucially, where does the opportunity sit? It's quite likely that we'll move away from this kind of pyramid notion of the organization, with all the brilliance at the top earning the most money, towards a more distributed and devolved model, where people have a much more fluid relationship with structure and task and role, and probably also recognition, reward, and performance.
And you see that happening, because obviously, even pre AI and the LLM models that we're seeing now, we heard that organizations were going to move in that direction, right? So the tech world, when the tech world started coming along, Facebook and Amazon and all this sort of thing, we want to flatten our structures and bring down that whole pyramid structure, but it's not necessarily happened. But you see this being the thing that does.
It's different. So again, in that strategic work, we talk about epistemic fracture, and episteme is a way of knowing, of understanding the world, but they become exhausted over time. An episteme fails and it is replaced, but it resists change because it makes sense. It feels right. It's embodied within our systems. Universities have big campuses and staff and students and endowments. They're not going to disappear overnight, but that doesn't mean they're still relevant. So systems dogma sort of persists in things, but we're not just facing an AI revolution. I look at these three broad contexts: the context of the social age with its radical connectivity and proliferation and diversification of technology, which fundamentally rebalances power between individual and organizations. The second key pressure is the post-pandemic reality. The pandemic fractured the relationship between space and power. And that's why organizations are struggling so much. Even brilliant organizations are struggling so much to come to terms with this, because the language of back to the office or back to work or the future of work is really a conversation about a reimposition of a legacy and outdated structure of control. And then on top of all of that, which in itself is probably paradigmatic, you get AI. And what AI does is it disaggregates or unbundles many things which were historically true. So, for example, the relationship between learning, practice, and capability falls apart. People can create without mastery. They can learn outside systems. They can find performance support, which is dialogic. You don't have to learn the interfaces. These three things individually, any one of them could topple the systems that we have. Together, they really do create a groundswell of change. And we see this taking shape, and we see some organizations experimenting with parts of this, starting to look at how they can disaggregate or unbundle. And that language is quite useful, to take apart things we are certain about and reconstitute them in different ways.
Yeah. I've got a question about that, but Egle, have you got any thoughts?
Oh, yeah, I do have thoughts.
Lots of thoughts.
I like, Julian, your framework of that allows us to think about AI beyond just AI, because we have a few big changes in the workplace happening. And although we talk about the so-called future of work. Right now, in the context of AI, AI is going to take us to the future of work, which is in a way, if you take away the cringe from that phrase, it does do that. But yeah, the fact that connectivity and the power dynamic and these power changes, and even the social contract between the employer and the employee has changed, or has been changed since 2020 at least. These are definitely worth thinking about, and AI just exacerbates that. When I think about AI, and I'll see how my framework fits with Julian's framework, because I think, generally speaking, I agree with what Julian is saying and that way of thinking. However, I have my own little pyramid in my head, and I'm just trying to sort of put them together. So when I think about the change that we are seeing in the world of work, I'm not going to go into the societal change, because this is what triggered my own existential crisis, and I ended up working in AI. So I like to think about change in the workplace at three levels. So at the individual level that we talked about, at the job level, and at the organizational level. At the individual level, one thing that is happening in some orgs, and that is going to be soon be happening, I think, in other orgs, is the question of identity. How do we see ourselves once we take away, Julian, what you said, the learning practice capability process, once we take it apart and we start to question the value of knowledge and the value of skill. What does that mean for how we see ourselves? Because for better or worse, our identities, at least in the Western world, they're very much tied to what we do and how we do it. Then there is the question of skills that we have, because we are, because they are the currency for us. We are paid, our income is based on that. So again, there's one notion of Julian's process. The way I've been thinking about it is that we are used to this incremental and almost inevitable growth in the value of our skills. So we start at the early stage, and then we keep growing these skills. Some of these skills change. The world has accelerated over the past 10, 15 years. But we still expect that, in 20 years, there's definitely going to be this huge vault of skills. We are not used to a situation where we keep our skills growing, and then we turn, 40, 45, and suddenly the value drops. Like, these skills are not needed anymore. So how do we make sense of that, and what that means for us? So dealing with identity, with fear, with uncertainty, with the stress of what the additional due to the pressure that AI may put on the individual. So that's the individual level. At the job level, interesting things are happening here, because of course AI takes away some jobs, it changes other jobs. It very much depends on the type of job that you do, repetitive versus creative, specialist versus manager. Manager's role, to Julian's point, is it would be changing a lot for various reasons, leading people through change, dealing with one thing that's happening, and there's some interesting research from HBS, I think Wharton and P&G. They did this paper a few months ago, which was about comparing individual versus team output, and then individual plus AI and team plus AI output. So they sort of in the product context, and with the caveat that it is always, we need to be cautious about generalizing findings. But one insight that they had is that an individual plus AI can produce better output than a team without AI, and a team with AI produces different outputs than a team without AI. And people really enjoy collaborating with AI, and it lifts the floor. So lower skilled people with AI perform at a different level. So what does that mean for how we work in teams? What does that mean for leaders and for managers practically, when you have to deal with those dynamics? And the final one is the org level. So now we're talking about hierarchies. What does it mean when the skill or your knowledge or tenure does not correlate with where you are, how much you make, what power you have in the organization? What does that mean for organizations in general when a startup, because there's this concept of a moat in the startup world about or in the business world in general. So what protects you from competition? And usually it would be infrastructure, it would be teams, know-how, knowledge, all of these things. And there's still moats remaining, but some of the previous modes of I can only compete with a big org if I am myself a reasonably big org who has raised a lot of money. That may not be true anymore. So what does that mean for the competitive environment, the change of services and products and value that companies create, and what pressure is going to put on people individually to actually help organizations to implement that strategy? And the final thing I think I wanted to say here is the pace. This is a really interesting thing that I picked up on a few months ago, this idea of a 24-hour day, because when we're talking about agents, again, with a caveat that they are not very widespread yet, although there are some good use cases for them, there are also a lot of limitations, but we are used to the kind of work where we finish our work and then we pick up the next morning from where we left off. But if there are AI employees, so to say, or AI is constantly picking up the slack and doing some work in the process while we sleep, we start the next day at a different point. So what does that mean for even how we feel cognitively? Just a lot of interesting questions there. I'm gonna shut up.
Yeah. I guess it would take an age to answer all of those things or explore all of those things, but it's super interesting. I guess my overarching thing is that as I'm hearing both of you talk about this space is, and I guess I can convert it to a question. Try to convert it to a question: Is change, the change that we're seeing associated with not just AI but the other things that you mentioned there? Is it just inevitable and it's a wave that we just have to try to keep up with or surf or tumble along with, or is it required? Are we at a stage now where the workplace, certainly you see a lot of statistics that show that the workplace isn't working for a lot of people, so maybe it's required. And I guess the leading part of that the thought that I've got in the background of that is, certainly we've seen things in the past and we're seeing things now where, what's that Jeff Goldblum quote from Jurassic Park? Just because you can doesn't mean that you should, sort of thing. I butchered that quote. Essentially, just because we can do these things, should we? So for example, I love working from home. I've worked from home for a long time. But, I'll be honest, there is a certain thing that you get from being in a place with people. This is fine now online, but this might be slightly better if we were all sat together around a table, perhaps. So is there a risk sometimes that we lose aspects just because we feel like we should change, because there's this wave and we're just kind of carrying on and yeah. That's the longest winded question ever, but do you see what I'm trying to ask there? Hopefully.
So, just sort of respond to part of that. There are two sort of ways that we can look at this. One is about change within the system. So this is about how systems evolve. And the other is change of the system itself, the broader piece where what we know may become abstract, may become broken. We're clearly seeing both of those things at play. We have to adapt within the system today because we need to keep afloat. We need to keep up. But if the system around us is changing, we also need to be building the sort of sense-making capability, the distributed sensory array to work out what is going on. We need to be building a more fluid type of capability and building organizations which are more reconfigurable to need. So the language of change is itself a little bit disingenuous or unhelpful. Entropy may be a better word. Entropy is kind of one of the universal truths. Things break, things fall out of practice. And it's unhelpful when we start saying, it's changing more than ever before. Change is constant. Change is just a dynamic, fluid process. But things break, things fall apart, and so they should. That's a blessing, not a challenge. What we may consider at the broadest level is what purpose do our organizations serve? It's entirely possible to build on what Egle was saying, that we should be reconsidering. I wrote a series of essays about future work which explored this. Maybe we should be reconceiving the notion of the city, the notion of nations, the notion of work itself in terms of how it's located, where it's located, our relationship with infrastructure, our relationship with recognition and reward. In general, we're moving from a single dimensional system, which is like I live at home within a community, I go to work, I sit within a nation. We're moving towards a much more multi-dimensional model. So the identity project research I did around this and the communities research shows clearly people are inhabiting an increased number of spaces with a different identity within each. So we are much more fluid in where we belong and what our identity is and how it is expressed within those spaces. So maybe we will have a model of work which becomes not simply unconstrained by time, because what does time give us? Well, it just gives us rush hour and expensive holidays. It doesn't really work for us very well anymore. We no longer need to go and harvest the fields in the summer holidays. We could change a lot of that stuff and we could distribute far better. So if we look at this sort of multi-dimensional model and the disaggregation of what came before, we may decide, and what we may see is there is an emergent structure of connection. So our communities are persistent. Nobody makes us redundant from our communities. And frankly, nobody does us over in those communities the same way that organizations do. So it's organizations that have spent 40 years fracturing the social contract for profit and now reap the rewards of that with low engagement. But it's a mistake to think that people have low engagement and they're just sat at Starbucks doing nothing. They're not. They're really busy running their vintage store or writing a book or listening to me. They're doing all sorts of incredible things and they're being rewarded in all sorts of different ways. So this is why I take a much broader ecosystem approach. Maybe we will end up with organizations that are smaller, more disposable, certainly more reconfigurable. As Egle said, we are moving away from infrastructure being a defining feature of an organization towards it being an albatross that sits around their neck. All legacy systems give us is a headache when we try to change. When we move to software as service models and we move to proliferated and diverse ecosystems of technology, then our ability to dispose of technology and the transferability of data and skills and identity and belonging becomes far more significant. It's not a big stretch to say maybe we will belong within emergent guild-type structures, professional structures. We will be contracted to work within more fluid organizations, and we will inhabit a very diverse social and identity type of landscape.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, go on, Egle, you go.
Yeah, I have a reflection. Hopefully some question is going to come out of this. So listening to what you're saying, is it correct to say that your view is essentially that there's change happening, and entropy, and then there's what we do to adapt to that change? So there's something that's inevitable and something that we have autonomy over. And these ideas that you were talking about, especially how we organize ourselves, that communities are persistent and so on, and that people, once they had the ability to not work within these structures, they started inventing some other meaningful work for themselves, which is, on one hand, this is great. On the other hand, that also means that they cannot make enough money or have the opportunity in what used to be safe and secure structures. But that reminds me of that idea of how technology, and specifically in this case AI, enables. So obviously there are these big downsides, but there's also the idea that enables people to reap these outsized rewards in doing their own thing over, in comparison to having this traditional full-time work. And on one hand, I'm really excited about the idea that someone may have an idea for a business, or may have such a unique skill that is of very like outsized value in the workplace. But on the other hand, that also makes me think about that there are still it's almost like, although we are moving, or hopefully moving, towards that more fulfilling way of organizing society and work and so on, there also feels like there are a lot of blockers from people actually taking advantage of that. Even if you give people the tools and the opportunity to create businesses in their community without VC capital, meaning that they can do something very local and very, very, very needed, there's something human about actually, things like self-efficacy, things like exposure role modeling, identity of someone who can do this. These things we need to take care of. And I see a question coming out. So this change, Julian, that you were talking about, this alternative system, is this something that can be nudged or influenced to happen? Because I feel like there's so much force keeping it as it is, that we can think about what could be, but for that change to happen, it needs to happen at a certain scale. And I don't know how to make the change happen at that scale.
I should say, I'm not arguing that the change is going to be good. I'm pretty sure that we're facing a deep valley, and on the other side of it, there may be some form of utopia, but I'm fairly sure we're going to get lost in the darkness before we get there. We already see, wealth inequality is increasing, and it's most likely that, when people ask me, what will AI do next? I say it'll make a small number of people extraordinarily rich at the cost of an extraordinarily large number of people. And that, for me, remains true. For all of our worrying and prevarication and regulation and talk of ethics and bias, a few people are really busy getting really rich. And that's the pattern of history, and that will be the pattern of the future. I think that what is interesting is that people who are taking initiative beyond the organization aren't just making small businesses, they're making global businesses. They're able to do so without infrastructure. We're able to see that organizations can adapt, but only within limits. And in that unconstrained space around us, it is the Wild West. There are well-established models of disruption. So if you look at financial services, for example, the big banks are being assailed by fintech companies, but those fintech companies are not coming along and saying, we will be a big bank. They come along and say, we will move money for migrants. That's all we'll do. If you want a mortgage, don't talk to us. If you want a current account, don't talk to us. We move money for migrants. That's what we do. So what they do is they take the value proposition, the value chain of the bank, they stretch it out and they bite a chunk out of it. We will do payment processing really well with a small white tablet, and you'll see it in every bar you go to. That's what we'll do. We do nothing else. So they're stretching and breaking the value chain. Asymmetric disruption and competition is really interesting. The dominant model, the disruptive model. So we already see that. But asymmetric disruptors are typically empowered by technology, and here's AI, which is even better than ever as a technology. So that, I think, is going to be accelerating and proliferating. The notion that I'm not arguing this point strongly, but I'll just mention it. The notion of well-being and wealth being tied to jobs relies on the fact that we believe money is real, which of course it isn't. It's yet something else which is made up. So we see this as this rather forward-facing abstract discussion about, what do we need to do about work? Do we need a minimum wage or a universal wage, or, what are we going to do? Well, the likelihood is we probably will ultimately need to reconsider the fundamentals of our relationship with the economy for two reasons. One is because our current economic models are, broadly speaking, based on utility and asset and ownership and transfer. So, I own a piece of ground, there's something of value under it, I dig it up, I transport it, I sell it to you, and you pay me. If there's lots of it, you pay me less. If there's not much of it, you pay me more. That model is being changed. Most of us aren't digging stuff out of the ground anymore. we're creating stuff, we're using legacy models of copyright and ownership and control and synthesis, and it's all getting very untidy. So longer term, that model will probably adapt and change. And the second thing is that markets are not a universal good. If you look at baseball or football, you've gone away from it being a kind of democratized space where people came together to having skyboxes and premium features, and people pay to get on the plane quicker. Markets impose difference and inequality. So we cannot necessarily just rely on markets in and of themselves solving this. I'm not making a big thing of that because, frankly, it sounds ridiculous to be talking about what is our relationship with money and the economy going to be. But longer term, it will almost certainly change because we're becoming very far removed from having our hands on the tools, or at least some of us are.
I don't know how to respond to that. We need to completely reject the thought of money. Yeah, I need to think about that, get my head around it a little bit. Thanks for the comment, by the way, Danny. I totally agree. Yeah. You said right at the start of your answer there, or that you thought there, something that I was going to ask you about, which you've already answered. You said that it won't necessarily be good, because as you were both having that conversation before, the thing that was just in my head was, what if the grass isn't greener? What if this utopia doesn't exist on the other side? And the other thing that goes in my head was, you talked about, back to when you talked about things entropy and breakdown, and I think you did say that that's good and that's natural. Like, is there a risk that we do lose things along the way? Like take social media, for example. I feel like that's a good example of something that we've almost, and I'll come to regret this in 10 years when it's completely changed, but I almost we've seen a bell curve with that. Like, at the start, it was very useful. It was a good way of like distributing the media and all that sort of stuff. And it's got to a point now where it's just a complete clusterfuck, like to the point where it's ultimately useless, and like people want to go back from it. And I see a lot of, I've got 2 young children, and I'm pretty desperate to keep them off social media for as long as possible because it's toxic. So yeah, where was I going with that? So you see a number of things like that, where you move into this new world because change seems inevitable, and then you look back and you go, it wasn't so bad. It wasn't so bad back then. I used to think I hated going to the office and the commute and all the rest of it, and now, I quite like a commute because I get to listen to the radio for half an hour on the way to work, and I quite like meeting people in person and these sorts of things. So yeah, but you kind of answered that, right? Because you said that it's not necessarily better, it's just different. And then you talked about how the whole social fabric of human beings will break down, and I didn't really understand that.
Yeah.
But I tried my best.
Yeah, I think the problem that with these changes about, we are at the point A, and we're kind of at different paces moving towards point B, and we might look back and think that what if point A was better? The problem is that we don't really have, as an individual, we can argue about collective action, but in the moment, as an individual, you don't really have a choice. So it's not a case of, if only I didn't use Facebook in 2012, you couldn't not, or if you're for the past 10 years in the workplace and not using LinkedIn and having a profile, like, things are, to a degree, we don't have autonomy over them. And I think this is where a lot of discomfort and fear is coming from, because there are some individuals that have that autonomy, that they're creating these things, and our interests are not aligned a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. I suppose, the things we have to remember are that, social media is not just Facebook and LinkedIn. It's entirely irrelevant whether those platforms succeed or fail. What they have given us is radical connectivity, and we're never going to get less connected. So in my core work on the social age, we see that, radical connectivity and democratization of technology, 2 fundamental shifts that rebalance power. It's easier to start a riot or create a community than ever before. So we will be radically connected. Where our data is held, how transferable it is, what systems and platforms we're on are almost irrelevant. We see that people operate around the edges of systems again and again. We're connected in ever more communities. In the landscape of communities research I did in the NHS, and then subsequently in aerospace, in defense, we see on average people are part of 15 different communities, helping them to be effective on a weekly basis. We are unreconciled, we are split apart. You know, my next book, the Unreconciled Self, A Planetary Philosophy, looks at some of this, you know, what identity and belonging and our relationship with what came before. Because, you know, what you said, Matt, well, I've realized I quite like the commute because I can listen to a podcast. Well, of course you do. And so do I, because we're really privileged, because we're not holding down 3 jobs so we can keep a roof over our heads. You know, for us, it's really nice. You know, I like a bit of time when nobody's bothering me. I love it. I love a train ride twice a week. I get some writing done. But, you know, we can't generalize from that. Without a doubt, we're seeing, you know, wealth inequality, gender-based inequality, all broadening and deepening because of this. And around it all is this really unfortunate truth that we are not fighting this battle on a level playing field. So whatever organizations choose to do and whatever we do in terms of regulation and control, there is a whole unconstrained marketplace operating around the edge of it. So if we manage to get our organizations to adapt and change in ways we think are good and fair, but somebody still outcompetes us, then we're going to lose them anyway. And that's the really fundamental difference. It used to be sort of unimaginable. Look how difficult it was to start a new airline or a new car company. It was really, really difficult. And now it's easier than ever to disrupt. And at the same time, and Stuart's just put a point about here, what we see cognitively, I've got a whole chapter on this in the new book, what we see is that the pace of dialogue and change has outstripped our cognitive ability to deal with it. So we are habituating to it and we are becoming less because of it. So it is, and I say this with certainty, you know, we are fracturing and breaking our structures of culture and truth and trust. And, you know, that's very uncomfortable. It's not necessarily bad, but we should recognize what we are doing. So it's not about disinformation or bias within a known system. We are fundamentally changing it. The pace of change has outstripped our cognitive ability. And we know, you know, your work will explore this much better than mine. When we're presented, when we are overwhelmed by information, our brains do something which is really brilliant, but terribly dangerous. They cease to be clever and they say, oh my God, I'm brilliant. I'll collapse this down to a binary choice. It's this or it's this. And I choose this. So we artificially impose structure. We have to do that. We're just unable to sort of cope without it. So we end up feeling certain and making decisions, but the landscape around us is changing ever faster. So when if you look at this at a structural level, what does it mean? Most people don't think we will pursue a sociocultural model. So a sociocultural model would say, we come from the farms, we live in our communities, technology is here, it's a useful tool, it's never going to be more than a tool. Maybe we automate the hoover and mow the lawn, but nothing more than that. That sociocultural model where technology fits conveniently into what we know, that's gone. Not many people want robot overlords. So most people don't want to be ruled by the robots. So you end up with this anthropotechnic model, which is having the AI on the board, having human machine teams. We're already seeing that they can perform really well. What we're not addressing is who's going to be in charge. So if you start to see that the AI systems are better at resource allocation, task management, performance support, how are we going to feel about that? How is the chief exec going to feel when we need a new strategic report and the AI says the new graduate can do it better than you? And by the way, you should probably pay them more to do it. They're going to feel pretty bad about it. So really getting into the guts of that, it's not just about synthesis, it's also about structures of power and control within that. Because if we don't do it, somebody else is absolutely going to do it. If somebody says to me, there's a software tool right now which will let you optimize resource and task allocation, and it will give you 1% efficiency at scale across your organization, I'll sign up and buy it right now. So simply denying or holding out against that is not a route to success.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that on aspects of that on an individual level. You know, I'm just trying to think. You know, and this is like, I'm a huge advocate of. I love ChatGPT. I use it every single day. I'm an independent practitioner, so actually it operates as almost a colleague for me. You know, I can bounce things off it and all the rest of it. But there are times, you said about like who's in charge, where I run something through ChatGPT just by pure habit now, and it comes out with a different version of it. And I do have those moments where I'm like, is this better? Like, it's different. It's different in terms of the way it's written it. And it on paper, it might be better, but it doesn't have my tone of voice and it doesn't sound like me. So I'm like, no, my version was better. And it's that's where, if I'm trying to, kind of put myself in, when you were talking about how those structures change and how that makes you feel, that for me is that, who's in charge piece. Is it me who's in charge of that, or is it ChatGPT who's in charge? And it is quite uncomfortable to think at some point it will just outstrip my ability that I'm not required. Yeah. Can I ask a quick question to you both, because I know you probably both need to go. We're slightly over time. Have you got 5 more minutes?
Yeah, I can do 5.
Just about 5 more minutes. Cool. I just wanted to ask you about this one at the bottom here. So this is a previous comment that put up from Stuart. Talked about the psychosocial hazards in the workplace. We've not talked as much specifically about well-being, which is fine, because I think we've gone into the broader, like, how does this affect how we work and employment and all the rest of it. I asked you when we met in person whether you thought AI was a psychosocial hazard or a control measure. The answer to that probably is a bit of both, right? But I guess the follow-up question from that is, well, unless you think there is an answer to that. And the follow-up question, I guess, is how do you think organizations practically can leverage the benefits whilst mitigating the risks? What do you think?
My first question is benefits to whom and risks to whom? I mean, that's the thing, that what organizations can do to maximize benefits and reduce risks may not be what you as an individual would want them to do. That's the issue, and that's the hazard. And I think that's a good wrap up to our whole conversation, because it very much depends about what happens from now. Like, there's this change happening. It's up to any individual organization to decide what they're going to do with it, how they're going to react, how they're going to pull these levers in favor of different stakeholders in the organizational system. Yeah, where do I want to go with this? Is that, there's no straightforward answer. What I've noticed is that even taking the very same technology and use case, in different contexts, in different organizations and teams, it's used differently. Sometimes it's used as an excuse to, let's reduce headcount and pretty much downside to the employee. In other cases, it's very much about, oh my God, this completely changes what we do. Let's get more people, different people, and do more with it. So it's, once again, we're going back to, what do individuals do, both leaders and employees? How work ends up being organized at that organization, and what the organization decides to do with this technology in the first place.
I don't want to give a bleak response, but it'd be slightly bleak. I feel I should just respond to Danny's comment as well. A ton of people are talking about replacing high-paid roles with AI. So it's it might not be quite as visible, but there's definitely that conversation going on. Pretty much some of human history shows us what's going to happen next, which is a load of people losing their jobs. I mean, AI is about efficiency and optimization, and no organization is going to hold on to people out of sentiment. And if they do, they'll go out of business. I mean, that's abundantly clear. If you sort of look in parallel, this year in the UK, the Association of Pride Organisers, the entity that represents, from memory, so please forgive me if I get this wrong, about 60% of pride organisations that put on things like London Pride or Portsmouth Pride, the organisations that put those things on saw a significant reduction in their funding. So these are not American organisations, they're UK organisations, in some cases seeing 60% shortfall in funding. And the reason they see a shortfall in funding is because the companies that used to support them, and these are really relatively small amounts of money, think, what's going to happen if we're doing business in America and we're seen to be supporting a diversity and equity inclusion type of organization, let's just cut our risk and let's cut the funding. And that tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the ethics and values of organizations. Organizations can be nice. I'm sure we've all had jobs that we enjoy. Organizations are not entities of social good on the whole. There are some exceptions. They are entities of productivity and effect. That's what they are supposed to do. That's what they're legally obliged to do, is to turn a profit for shareholders. So they will try to do it well, but we are overwhelmingly and undoubtedly going to see profit, short-term market forces driving inequality and change and significant losses of jobs. And anybody that doesn't see that coming has their eyes entirely shut. We already see it. If you look in the market right now, you see some interesting things. Efficiency and optimization used to give you a window to get a return on investment, but no longer. One of the global law firms I talked to said they're seeing 50 to 60% efficiencies in some of their processing, but they are immediately under price pressure from their clients. They didn't have 18 months to exploit that. It's just a hygiene factor. Their costs are cut and their rates are cut. So what are they doing? They're saying, well, you can pay a premium to have a human look at the thing to tell you that it's good. We're seeing that in all sorts of contexts. Learning organizations are doing it too. It can be designed by AI, but we'll put a human in the mix. Well, the danger of that is that we like to think that humans are brilliant, but it turns out we're probably not going to add that much value. And when people really see the stark difference, are they going to continue to pay the premium? Some will, but many won't. So we sort of need to just move beyond that conversation to think, if we want organizations to be entities of social good, then that's great. They should start by tackling the gender pay gap, which I believe at the moment will take another 104 years to close. Not because of any structural need, it's because nobody wants to close it enough. If organizations wanted to close it, they could close it tomorrow, but they don't want it enough. And it will be the same with this. We want social justice, we want equity, we want to do good, but we don't want it enough that we're going to post a smaller profit and take a beating from shareholders or go out of business. So we have to kind of recalibrate how we see this, I think.
Yeah, and we can see that immediately already for some tasks and some roles, AI has double-digit efficiency gains. So if you save 40% of time on your usual tasks, does that mean that now you can do 3-day weeks? No, you just do 2 extra days of work. Like these benefits are not accumulating to the employee.
Absolutely. That was bleak. We should finish with something more cheerful.
Yeah, they're on that cheery note. Well, you started talking about existential crises at the start, didn't you? And I feel like, yeah, that might have just triggered one in myself. So thanks for that, as I'm going on holiday tomorrow. But yeah, I'll have a week to chill out on a beach and forget this ever happened. No, look, we'll leave it there. Only because I think it's a fascinating discussion. Obviously, such a huge topic. Can't cover it all in the time available. I feel like this could be a weekly thing. I'm not nailing you down to this, but you could talk about it every single week and still not scratch the surface in terms of covering everything. But I guess a good place to start for people would be to hear more from yourselves. So do you want to do a quick plug before we log off? Where can people find you? Egle, do you want to go first?
Yes. I am mostly active on LinkedIn, so if you can find my name, I'm Egle Vinauskaite, not that it helps you. Look it up, how it's spelled. My company is nodes.works. This is where you'll find holistic AI adoption, AI strategy for L&D and talent teams, human upskilling. And if that's something that you're exploring, do let me know. I'd love to chat and see how the world of work is moving and adapting in this direction. I just love talking about these things. This is why I'm here.
Amazing. Thanks, Egle. Julian?
And I would really encourage you to follow Egle's work. I think it's fascinating. It's rigorous. It's research-based. Not somebody that's fallen into this in the last year with a quick story, but there's a real depth to that work. So I greatly value it. My work can generally be found. I'm easy to find online through Sea Salt Learning. My last book, Engines of Engagement, a curious book about generative AI, is available as a free ebook on the Sea Salt Learning site, and also details of the strategic AI workshops I'm running now. So that's where you can find my blog. I write daily as I find my way in this space. So it's been great hanging out with you both.
Nice one. Thanks, Julian. I'm definitely going to get that book. Amazing. And yes, quick plug from me, anyone who's listening. If you're not part of the Working Well community, what are you doing with your lives? I will put a quick QR code on the screen for the last 5 seconds. If you want to join our community, hear more amazing conversations like this with amazing experts like Julian and Egle, then that's the place to be. Until next time, thank you so much both.